My name is Dan Peizer, again with Catalent Pharma Solutions. I am a Strategic Marketing Director, and I'm here to talk to you today about drug design and our approach, which we like to call Better Treatments by Design. So the pressures to get drugs approved are mounting. Okay? We have shrinking pipelines, we have increased costs, we have more complex requirements to get these drugs through regulatory agencies. What are some of the factors that we use to measure success? Well, of course, market approval is one, but what are some others? Formulary pickup, patient feedback, some therapeutic outcomes, and the variety of these things all come together to measure success for these drugs. Obviously, a financial outcome of having scripts written is one of the key measurements that many companies look at. But what we found is something interesting. McKinsey recently did a study, and what they found was that these factors actually can all come together in a group, and they can look at all of the drugs that were coming into the marketplace. And measuring success, they found that about 2/3 of drugs that were coming into the marketplace did not achieve the success that was originally put together for them. Okay? We've all put business cases together. What are these drugs going to look like? You have a target product profile. 67% failure rate. It's quite high. What was the reason for that? Well, what they did was they broke these drugs down into 3 categories. There was the category of drugs you can see in white, which were ones that satisfied an unmet need. Well, clearly those are going to be successful, right? They have a very low burden to be successful. The second group were ones that had a strong differentiation, okay, and there was a low patient burden to achieve success. But more than half of them were drugs that were being developed into a space where there was a standard already established for that disease, and they were not differentiated enough, and these drugs failed. What McKinsey said was, the solution to these are innovative approaches that account for stakeholder needs. Now, what's a stakeholder? Well, at Catalent, we believe in the full continuum of people that are going to be impacted by a drug. Okay? We understand that most of the time, in fact all the time, developers are our customers, but we also appreciate that at the end of everything that we do, there's a patient, and there's a prescriber, and then there's even a payer sometimes that intervenes in that process. So we try to consider all of these stakeholders in our process. When it comes to developers, what are the key things that we need to look at? Well, obviously, developers are interested in speed, they're interested in safety, and a lot of times they're interested in differentiation, and a lot of things go into those. When it comes to a prescriber, they have a little bit of a different take. Okay? They're looking at resolution of the disease. That's a very key measure for them, but they're also looking at compliance. If I prescribe a drug, I want to make sure that the patient can take it and follow through with the therapy. If you're a payer, one of the things that you're very interested in is the economic outcome, and the clinical outcome as well. And what those two things kind of bring together is, if I'm going to allow this drug to be scripted, I'm going to put it on formulary, I want to make sure that it is more cost-effective than an alternative, okay? And I'm going to get disease resolution. In some situations, you may have an alternative where an organ transplant may be necessary if this drug is not given, and the consequence economically to the payer can be very drastic. So those economic outcomes are very important. But not to forget, and one of the most important, if not the most important stakeholder in the whole process is the patient. And when it comes to the patient, things like ease of use, compliance, and their experience in taking the drugs on a regular basis is a critical factor in the success of these drugs. All right, so let's focus on patients for just a minute. All right, Catalent was very interested in this, and through our Catalent Applied Drug Delivery Institute, we endeavored to do a little bit of research. And the research we wanted to do was to look at all of the available literature on drug approvals over the last, say, 6 or 7 years. And we also decided that it would be, we'd be remiss if we just did paper research. We also needed to get some feedback from the people who are on the front lines of this. So we also interviewed a registered nurse, a drug developer, and a clinician to get their insights into a variety of different factors which could weigh in to the success of a drug. And this is what we came up with. You can see arrayed around this center area here are all of these various factors which weigh in to the possible success of the drug. What we found was amazing. 60% of the new molecular entities that had been approved since 2009 had some non-optimization when it came to outcomes. That they weren't fully optimized for this patient group or the disease in some way or another based on one of these factors. Okay? And that if these factors had been addressed in the formulation stage, those outcomes could have been different. Now that is pretty daunting. If you take that data and you consider that with what McKinsey showed, this is a solvable problem. Now what's the consequence of this? Let's show some real world data. Let's take patients again as an example, and we're going to talk about non-adherence. Now, in order to standardize this, what I'm going to show you is, this was research that was done looking at patients who were taking a chronic once-a-day drug, okay? So a drug that was required once a day for a chronic therapy, so standardized across markets. And while we did this in the US, this is very similar to what you'd see in most developed markets for these types of drugs. So for every 100 prescriptions that was written for one of these chronic drugs, 16 people out of the 100 didn't even bother to get the drug filled at the pharmacy. Okay, so you've already got a drop-off rate there of 16% of people who elected for one reason or another not to even go to the pharmacy and get the prescription filled. Well, that's a problem in and of itself, but it is a reality. Now, here's the thing. Out of this remaining group, an additional 20% of the people were poor responders to the therapy. Now, for some therapies, this can be as high as 80%. But on average, and what we saw in our research, 20% was a pretty good benchmark for us to go with. Now you've got a lot of drop-off already, okay? You've already lost a good third of the population of people who could have benefited from this. And of this 40%, what we found were within 6 months, they were non-adherent. So they dropped off having taken a once-a-day drug after 6 months. Look what you're left with. Okay? This is a significant problem, and at some stages, I mean, obviously, there's not much you can do if you elect not to fill the script in the first place, right? But for poor responders and for non-adherence, we feel there's a lot that can be done. The consequence of this, though, is that as a result of this, 70% of the people who are prescribed a chronic drug like this never experienced the therapeutic benefit they were supposed to. 70%. Okay? So if only 1 in 4 people in this case, and on average kind of what we saw, were experiencing a clinical benefit, how can we win, right? The inalienable truth in prescribing drugs is that if the patient doesn't take the drug will fail. Right? I think we can all agree on that. So what can be done? Well, one of the things we wanted to do in part of this survey is to identify what the significant drug development challenges that were facing these formulators were. Listen, there's a variety of them. Maybe sometimes you can't address everything. It's interesting, when we first did this study back in 2004, the item that you see at number 6, cost, which was now identified by 30% of the respondents, wasn't even on the survey. They didn't identify cost as a factor. But of course, now it is a factor because you have financing that comes into play that you don't always control as a small developer. So we now see that as a pressure. Obviously, safety. I'm glad to see safety. I wish it was 100% instead of 75, but okay, we can agree that at least it's high. The troubling thing here is that while we're very happy to see that patient considerations were listed, it's really just about 25% of those respondents saying that they saw patient factors as important, significant drug development challenges. Okay? So at Catalent, we look at this and we say, you know, considering the experience that we have and what we have seen as far as successful and frankly unsuccessful drugs that have been launched into the marketplace, and not only the experience that we've had doing that, but you know, consider the extent of the work that Julian just discussed with drug development and the thought that goes into it. We really need to make that pay off. So one of the questions we also ask these developers is, when do you consider dose form changes and dose form optimization in your process, right? When does this start becoming really a thing for you? And what we found is that mostly the answer was occasionally. It's not frequently enough. You know, you can see frequently is not very high on their list, even throughout the phases. And this is actually a question we ask them through all phases of the drug development process. One of the most troubling things for me to look at here is that you see an uptick in frequently at phase 3. Sorry, too late. You want to start your whole drug development process over again? It's going to cost you $1 million and probably 18 months to 2 years. Okay? That means that was an oops. But that's an important oops for us because it's a consideration for us in our Better Treatments by Design process, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. Now, as part of this research, we identified some key drivers for the drug formulation process. So these product design factors that we identified, molecule and polymorph properties, PK/PD properties, and some patient-observed properties, all had drivers attached to them. Okay? And these drivers were many. You can see I've color-coded them based on how we aligned them to the major factors. But the list is long. I'm not going to read you the list because it goes on to another page. It's a huge list. These factors are very important, and there are a multitude of them. And if you really sit and think about it, they all make sense, and they're all factors. How do you make sense of it? Well, we wanted to make a little sense of it for ourselves, so we took all of these factors, and we condensed them down into 6 major buckets, 6 major areas where we really felt you could actually lever and impact the drug development process and the dose design process. The first was that the drug was difficult to administer or difficult to take. That the regimen may be too complex, right? Some patients can't take 2 tablets twice a day and then a scaled-down dose or a loading dose and figure out how and when and why to take these drugs, particularly geriatric patients who may have multiple dose regimens that they have to keep up with. Cost is a factor. We understand that one. Side effects, okay? Now, sometimes that's just due to the API. But sometimes that is something that we can address in formulation, and it should be addressed in formulation. Low perceived efficacy, that's something that we can work with also in drug design, and it's a factor that we found that we really want to get a little bit better understanding of, but it is something that is both psychological and, in real cases, you know, what the patient receives. Why this is an important low perceived efficacy is it's one of the major reasons people stop taking a drug. Okay? So we want to make sure that that's addressed. And then, of course, there's the difficulty to supply or distribute the drug, and that's going to be an important factor that you're going to hear about in just a little while because everything that we talk about in dose design has to be realistic. So, how does this all come to fruition? With Catalent, you have a partner that can not only do the early development work that you saw and takes a very thoughtful and data-driven approach to making sure we solve the challenges that your molecule presents, but we also solve the challenges that your stakeholders present. And sometimes when we talk about patients, that requires drug delivery technologies. And the drug delivery technologies that Catalent has, we feel are second to none, but can address all of these. And the approach that we take to dose design is to introduce the concept of this early enough in your development process that you can overcome these challenges and achieve that target product profile that you're looking for. Now, you can see that we've listed all of these different factors that can impact therapeutic adherence and compliance that were derived from this research that we just talked about here on the left. And you can see over top here, we address them with the various technologies that we have. Now, Catalent, as the inventor and innovator of soft gel technologies, has worked with that as a dose form. And you can see soft gels not only by themselves address many of these needs, but some of the technological advances that we've introduced with regards to non-gelatin shells, the ability to deliver macromolecules orally, and even abuse resistance technologies can further address many of these needs. With our fast dissolved Zydis tablets, we really overcome patient challenges with adherence and compliance. This is a fantastic dose form which can really bring back into the fold geriatric and pediatric patients, and particularly psychiatric patients where adherence and compliance becomes very difficult. Modified release technologies is a specialty of Catalent's. We have many years and many folks who have tremendous experience with manufacturing these technologies, and we can do quite a bit to reduce the complexity in dose regimens via these technologies. And we even offer flexible services in our stick packs and additional technologies like blow fill seal and others that can really help make the dosing very convenient. Okay, so with this broadest array of technologies that we offer, we really feel that we can help optimize these doses, not only for bioavailability, as you heard earlier, but for stability. And we look at everything that we offer as far as dose design with manufacturability in mind. Now, let me give you a couple of case studies here of where we've actually helped make the difference. And the first one is, an innovator comes to us with a drug that's designed to treat schizophrenia. Okay? The patient group involved here, however, is notorious for noncompliance. If they're institutionalized particularly, they'll have a habit of cheeking and spitting doses. Okay? But we also know that sometimes even left at home, non-adherence with this can have very big consequences. How did we work with the developer here? We worked with the developer with our Zydis dose form to achieve a product that removed the possibility of cheeking and spitting. When it was administered, it could not be cheeked or spit. The product dissolved instantly in the mouth, and you got better therapeutic adherence for that patient group, which resulted in much better outcomes. It's a great success story. Another case, a chemotherapy that had a very narrow therapeutic index, okay? And it required, one of the challenges with this drug was it could spike to toxic levels if it wasn't in sustained release format. So utilizing our OptiShell technology, we were able to achieve a dose form with a sustained release that maintained the therapeutic dose within that index, achieving a safe and successful therapy. Cough cold products, now even in the OTC space, where we're not talking about high-level therapeutics, but things that make patients feel better. In the pediatric space, this is a big problem, right? Formulating things for pediatrics can be a challenge because you have an unwilling, sometimes, patient group. They don't want to take medication themselves, and you have a caregiver that has to help with the process. So we achieved this with our FlexDose product, which is a stick pack product. We were able to flavor, taste mask, and this is a product that helped because it could be mixed into some applesauce or given directly to the child, or even mixed in some water to really help with that therapeutic dosing, okay? And then you have kids that feel better, and who doesn't want something like that? And these are just 3 examples of ways which our dose design can really help, but they're really impactful to the success of these products. So optimizing your molecule, as you heard from Julian, is obviously extremely important. It's an area where Catalent can help, but it's not the final step, okay? Now, we are big believers in a comprehensive approach to development. You'll note that we talked about selecting and optimizing your API and overcoming some formulation challenges earlier today. We're here to tell you that assessing your stakeholder needs as a first step is critical, because what it feeds is this next step of selecting your optimal dose form. This understanding is something that Catalent seeks to bring to you in our Better Treatments by Design process. Okay? So we call this Better Treatments by Design because we build this into your development program. Okay, we sit with you, we want to understand your patient group, we want to understand the disease process, and we have some built-in knowledge based on all the therapeutics that we've helped bring to the market on what may be a successful program. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why we feel that this approach and our ability to actually supply these products can put you on a fast track to a successful product. Now, there are a lot of reasons why you may not want to optimize your dose form in phase 1, right? You just got there. You're very milestone driven at this point, okay? And that may be for timelines that you may have as a developer. It may also be because your financing triggers are tied to your milestones. We understand that, right? You need to get through phase 1. You're looking for some positive data hits. That's great. But you may start to ask yourself, hey, you know what? If I can get powdered API into an Accelidose form and I'm good there, why don't I just go ahead with that? And you know what? After our talk here today, you can take a walk through the Messy here and find a multitude of people who can help you with 2-piece capsules. But is that the right thing for your drug? Is it the right thing even for your next stage of your clinical trial? Now when you go into phase 2, the number of participants in your trial is going to increase by 2 to 5 times. And now you're dealing with folks that have the disease that you're trying to address. Now you're talking about real patient factors. You're going to be assessed for side effects as well. So if you haven't done some of this work to optimize your dose at this point, you might be behind the curve. This may impact your clinical trial. Now, a lot of people look at the development process and say, after I get through 2A, I can start thinking about a nice, pretty dose. We're here to tell you you should start thinking about it earlier. If you start getting positive hits in phase 1, we're already here to help you as Catalent with the variety of dose form technologies that we have to get you to that next step and hopefully increase your chances of success through your clinical trials. So we look at this as intelligent dose design, and we feel that those decisions made early with a partner who can help you make them early puts you in a better stead. So in summary, 6 things I want to leave you with as really critical to get right. And I called getting your patient, your stakeholder data and information 0 because it shouldn't even be something like a step 1. It should be a given. And it is a given when you come to Catalent. Right? We really address that from the start. Obviously, we talked about getting the right molecule, and that's definitely what Julian talked about. But getting the form, formulation, and dose form is critical, and this extends into the packaging as well. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention.